Maurice, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time and welcome.
Good evening, Paul. Thank you so much for having me on the show this evening.
It's an absolute pleasure. Perhaps let's start here. Transparency International Zambia's focus is on governance and accountability. What concerns does your organization have over the government's claims of an alleged insurrection plot involving opposition figures?
Well, thanks a lot. I think a number of concerns really that we can highlight. Um, the first point to note is that these are obviously very serious allegations that must be handled really through due process and not through, what I can call a political messaging. Government, of course, has said, individuals were found with military-grade weapons and materials and all the rest of it. And the opposition, on the other hand, are disputing that account and are saying that the operation really was politically motivated. I think our position as an organization would be that neither side's narrative should be treated as established fact without any independent verification. And so we have been calling for that independent verification to happen so that if it is genuinely established that there was a plot against the state, which would of course be a very serious national security matter, and it would entail that all those responsible really must face the law. But on the other side, if the security powers that are being used to target opposition figures during what is a very consequential election, then that would also be a very grave abuse of state power. So I think the bottom line is that there needs to be a proper and independent investigation to establish the veracity of what has been asserted. And I don't think it is enough for government to just give that statement to the effect that that is what transpired. I think we need an independent verification of what has been stated.
Yeah, because the opposition says these allegations are politically motivated. How do you then independently establish where the truth lies when both sides are making such serious claims?
Well, absolutely. I think there must be a way in which evidence must ultimately be tested in an independent judicial process rather than through press conferences or political statements, as it were. And so I think there has to be a way in which transparent investigations get conducted by law enforcement agencies. But related to that also, there is the whole element of, the process that has taken place in relation to the arrests that have already happened. And so our expectation is that, lawyers representing those that have been detained must be given access to their clients, and also due legal process really must be followed. So entities such as Parliament, entities such as civil society, the Human Rights Commission, and the media should also play their oversight role in terms of just raising the necessity and the need for due process really to be followed. I think that it is important. The key principle being that the allegations of this magnitude cannot be resolved by asking the public simply to believe government or simply to believe the opposition. I think there has to be a testing of the evidence that is there in order for the truth to be established.
We know that Brian Mundubile alleges that security forces attempted to assassinate him during the raid, while authorities say they were merely responding to an armed threat. What questions do you think that an independent investigation must answer as this entire process is scrutinized?
I think it is absolutely essential that Mr. Mundubile has described the raid as an attack on his life. And while government also says that shots were fired at law enforcement officers, now these two are dramatically very different accounts of what is supposedly the same event. Now, when a major opposition political candidate alleges that an attempt was made on their life involving state security forces, that allegation cannot simply be dismissed politically. Equally, if security officers were genuinely fired upon, that also must be investigated thoroughly. So I think that a number of questions that need to be established through an independent investigation. Number one, who authorized the operation? I think that is an important consideration to be made. And then the second is the legal basis of the said operation. What is the legal basis? The third question is whether warrants existed and whether warrants were executed in terms of, the whole operation and how it was conducted. Questions like who fired first, because the police are saying that they were fired on first and then there was an exchange of fire. But then there's a counter allegation or statement that actually they were, responding to a shot that was fired by, the state entities when they went. Then what weapons were recovered? Where anyone's constitutional rights are also violated. So I think these are some of the questions that need to be raised. But also, Paul, one of the things that was stated in the government opposition was that this group has been under surveillance for a very long time. And one of the key questions we've been asking was that if they have been under surveillance for such a long time, why did the authorities have to wait until we are in a very part or very sensitive stage of an election for them to effect this arrest? Because it's very difficult really to see this outside the context of what is happening right now, which is a very consequential election. And so I think it raises a lot of very pertinent questions that the authorities must absolutely answer.
As you raise that question around the timing, we of course know that Zambia is dealing with allegations of voting irregularities and disputes over results. The Electoral Commission temporarily suspending vote counting over security concerns, and at the same time, international observers, including SADC and the European Union, have raised concerns about the electoral environment. What is the current state? Because, the slow release of election results is, for one, something that is creating a bit of tension.
Yeah, absolutely. The tensions are there, and the tensions have been rising. I need to mention that in the very latest update, which occurred just maybe about half an hour ago, we are now standing at 192 constituencies that have been declared out of 226. So we are remaining with around 34 constituencies before the final declaration is made. But having said that, I think some of the pertinent concerns that we have raised over this process have to do with, the suspension of the counting that was done on Friday, which I think you have made a reference to, because you had a 6-hour period in which, the counting was suspended. And for us, that raised a very, a very legitimate, what we considered a very legitimate integrity issue, because it is not clear up to now what really was happening during that 6-hour period. Even, for example, in terms of the ballots and, other election materials, who had access to those election materials during that period. But also, another key concern that we're raising is that the ECZ, when they were announcing the suspension, their reasoning that there had been violence in some constituencies or in some districts. And our question was, why should violence in some districts affect what is happening in the rest of the country in order for it to warrant a suspension of the process across the entire country? So we thought that that was a very strange and unprecedented decision, and certainly it has brought the integrity of the entire election into question. And I think these are questions that have to be addressed if any credibility is to be retained in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps before we let you go, what do you think is the single biggest governance and accountability test facing Zambia right now, and what must leaders do to address that? Because I mean, if we look at the opposition having described the allegations around a lot of what has been going on as fabricated and politically motivated, and really just looking at some of the crisis points.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the first point to note is that as a country, really, the way that, this election has been conducted, and also just some of the key issues that have arisen, I don't think that we have clothed ourselves in glory in that respect. And I think that there is a lot that will have to happen, even in the post-election period, for us to sort of reclaim some of, the credibility that we've had in the past. I think Zambia has always had this thing about us being, a very good example when it comes to democratic transitions and things like that. I think that is under very grave threat now. And so some of the things that really need to happen and that we need to look at as a country is issues to do with institutional independence, for example, of state institutions, because even just the Electoral Commission of Zambia, for example, and the way that they have conducted this election, I think questions around their true independence have to be asked and have to be answered. Issues to do with the rule of law, how government has treated opposition political parties and opposition candidates and things like that. Questions to do with accountability, questions to do with political maturity. This is the 7th election that we are having since 1991 in about 35-year period, and you'd have hoped that by this time our democracy would have matured to a level where we're able to have a proper discourse, even along things that we don't agree with over each other. So I think that Zambia needs to do quite a lot in this post-election environment in order for us to reclaim some of the glory that we have had in the past. And I'm really hoping that, we are not going to waste any time in that respect, because we really do need to reclaim ourselves in that sense.